1. The world before the crown. In the year *** 900 ***, the world did not feel united. It felt like broken stone. Empires existed, yes, but they were not the clean, organized powers people imagine when they say empire. They were messy, fragile, and constantly threatened by the oldest enemy in history: human ambition. Across the continents, the old systems were crumbling. Some regions still remembered ancient glory. Others had never known it. And in most places, the average person lived the same life their ancestors had lived. Wake, work, fear, pray, sleep. And somewhere above them, kings and lords argued over borders that most farmers never saw. But something was changing. The winds were different. Trade was growing. New weapons were appearing. New religions were spreading. And old kingdoms were beginning to crack. Historians call this era the First Great Shift. It was not a single event. It was a slow, unstoppable movement. Like a glacier. Like a tide. And it would eventually create something powerful enough to reshape the entire known world. A symbol. A legend. A crown. #2, the first Iron Crown. The Iron Crown was not made for beauty. It was not made for ceremony. It was not made to shine in a palace. It was made for war. The earliest record of it comes from a monastery archive in the mountains of northern lands, written in faded ink on a torn page. The monk who wrote it did not even call it a crown. He called it the Circle of Teeth. It was a ring of iron. Simple, rough, heavy, and around it were spikes, short, brutal points like the teeth of an animal. It was forged from the metal of broken swords. Some say it was made from the remains of an ancient battlefield. Others say it was forged from a fallen meteor. The truth was probably simpler. It was made from the melted weapons of defeated enemies. And that fact gave it meaning. Because the Iron Crown was not just a symbol of power. It was a symbol of victory, of domination, of survival. Whoever wore it did not claim they were chosen by God. They claimed they were chosen by war. #3, the Kingdom of Varen. The Iron Crown first appeared in a land called *** Varen**. Varen was not a large kingdom. It was not rich. It was not famous. But it had something far more dangerous than wealth. It had geography. To the north, mountains protected it. To the west, forests hid it. To the east, rivers slowed invaders. To the south, wide plains offered both danger and opportunity. Varen was like a fortress built by nature. And inside that fortress lived a people hardened by harsh winters and endless border raids. They were farmers and hunters. But every man could fight. And every woman knew how to survive. This was not a kingdom of poets. This was a kingdom of endurance. And in 900, a boy was born there who would become the first true Iron King. His name was Edrin Valak. #4, the childhood of Edrin Valak. Edrin did not grow up in luxury. He grew up in the shadow of violence. When he was 7, raiders from the southern plains attacked his village. They burned barns. They stole cattle. They killed his uncle. Edrin watched it happen. Not from behind a castle wall. From the dirt. From the smoke. From the screams. His mother pulled him into the forest and covered his mouth so he wouldn't cry. And in that moment, the boy learned something that would shape his entire life. There is no mercy in the world. Only strength and weakness. Years later, he would say, "Peace is a story kings tell children, but the world is written by swords." He trained early. By 10, he could shoot. By 12, he could ride. By 14, he could fight. And by 16, he was already known among local warriors as a young man with unnatural calm. He did not laugh much. He did not speak much, but when he looked at people, they felt as if he was measuring them, like a blacksmith measures metal. #5 The Weak King. At that time, Varen was ruled by King Tomas Roman III ***, a man whose greatest talent was staying alive. He was not brave. He was not strong. But he was careful. He paid tribute when he had to. He made alliances when he could. He avoided wars. And because of that, Varen survived. But survival was not enough for the nobles. They wanted expansion. They wanted glory. They wanted land. And worst of all, they wanted a king who would not hesitate. The nobles began whispering. Some spoke of rebellion. Some spoke of assassination. But most spoke of one thing. They needed a new kind of leader. And that leader would appear sooner than anyone expected. #6 The Night of the Broken Hall. In 919, when Edrin was 19, the royal hall in the capital of Varen burned. The official story was an accident. A lantern fell. A curtain caught fire. The hall burned quickly because it was made of old wood. But no one believed that, because the king died inside. And the fire started near the king's chamber. The nobles arrived the next day, pretending to mourn. But behind their mourning eyes was calculation. And then, the most shocking event happened. A young warrior stepped forward in the ruined hall. He wore no crown, no royal robe, no jewel, only a dark cloak and a sword. And he spoke to the nobles with a voice that carried like steel. The king is dead. Varen will not be ruled by cowards again. It was Edrin Valak. The nobles laughed at first. Then they stopped laughing when they saw the soldiers behind him. #7 The First Blood Council. The nobles demanded law. They demanded tradition. They demanded the royal line. Edrin gave them something else. He gave them a choice. A brutal choice. He said, "You may kneel and live, or you may stand and die." Some nobles stood. They believed their bloodline protected them. They believed their wealth protected them. They believed tradition protected them. Edrin proved them wrong. That day became known as the First Blood Council, because Edrin executed 3 nobles in front of everyone. Not with a public trial. Not with paperwork. With a sword. And the message was clear. The old world was ending. #8 The Forging of the Crown. A month later, Edrin did something that became legend. He gathered broken weapons from the royal armory, defeated raiders, noble guards, old battlefields. He ordered the blacksmiths to melt them. And he told them, "Make me a crown, not of gold, not of silver, but of war." The blacksmiths were terrified, because in the old world, crowns were sacred. Crowns were holy. Crowns were symbols of divine right. But Edrin did not believe in divine right. He believed in force. When the crown was finished, it looked brutal. A ring of iron. Heavy. Spiked. Ugly. But when he wore it, people felt something strange. It did not make him look like a king. It made him look like a weapon. And that was the birth of the legend. #9 The First Iron King. Edrin was not crowned in a cathedral. He was crowned in a forge. The blacksmith who placed it on his head was an old man named Gorlan ***. Gorlan later wrote, "The crown did not shine, but when it touched his brow, the air in the forge felt colder." Edrin's first words as king were not prayers. They were commands. He said, "Varen will expand, or Varen will be eaten." And so began the era of conquest. #10 The First War. The Plains of Sorrow. To the south of Varen lay the plains. They were ruled by many tribes. Horse warriors. Vast. Brutal. Unpredictable. For centuries, these tribes had raided Varen. They stole. They burned. They vanished. Edrin decided to end that. In 921, he marched south. Not with a huge army, but with a disciplined one. He trained his men differently. He taught them to fight in formations, to hold shields tight, to use spears and walls, to protect each other. The plains warriors fought like storms. Edrin's army fought like stone. And when storm meets stone, one of them breaks. The battle lasted 2 days. The grass turned red. Bodies covered the plains. And at the end, the tribes retreated. For the first time in history, the plains tribes were defeated in open battle. The battlefield became known as the Plains of Sorrow, because so many died that even the victors wept. #11, the rise of the Iron Doctrine. Edrin created a philosophy. It was simple. It was terrifying. It became known as the Iron Doctrine. It had 3 rules. 1, fear is a weapon. 2, mercy is weakness. 3, order is stronger than blood. This doctrine spread quickly, not because people loved it, but because it worked. Villages became safer. Trade increased. Raiders disappeared. And for the first time, Varen became stable. People began to accept Edrin, not as a rightful king, but as the king who made their lives survivable. #12, the first betrayal, Lord Haven. Not everyone accepted him. One noble, Lord Haven planned rebellion. Haven believed Edrin was a barbarian, a thief, a murderer. Haven gathered supporters. He bribed soldiers. He planned to strike during winter, when Edrin's army was away. But Edrin already knew, because Edrin understood something about power. Power is not held by swords. It is held by information. Edrin had spies everywhere. He waited. He allowed the rebellion to grow. Then he crushed it in one night. Haven was dragged from his home. His supporters were executed. And Edrin did something symbolic. He melted Haven's family sword and added it to the Iron Crown. From that day onward, people said, the crown grows heavier with every betrayal. #13, the Southern Gate. Edrin built the Southern Gate, a fortress wall across the main invasion routes. It was massive, stone and iron, towers like teeth, and at its center was a gate shaped like a mouth. People began calling it the Iron Mouth. It did not just block enemies. It sent a message. Varen was no longer prey. It was becoming a predator. #14, the Merchant Era begins. With the plains tribes weakened, trade routes opened. Merchants arrived from distant lands. They brought spices, silk, books, glass, strange instruments. Varen changed. Markets grew. Cities expanded. People began learning foreign languages. The world began entering Varen. And Varen began entering the world. Edrin encouraged it, because trade meant wealth. And wealth meant weapons. And weapons meant conquest. #15, the Western Kingdom of Lothar. To the west of Varen was the kingdom of Lothar ***. Lothar was richer, more civilized, more religious. Their king wore gold. Their nobles wore silk. They believed Varen was savage. They mocked the Iron Crown. They called Edrin the Forge King. But Lothar had one weakness. Their army was slow. Their nobles were arrogant. And their borders were poorly defended. Edrin saw this, and he decided Varen would not just defend itself. Varen would expand. #16, the First Western Campaign. In 934, Edrin marched west. The campaign was fast. Lothar expected a slow war. But Edrin attacked like a wolf. He did not siege castles for months. He cut supply lines. He burned farms. He forced surrender through hunger. It was cruel, but it was effective. Within 1 year, half of Lothar's border towns surrendered. The Lothar king, King Selden ***, panicked. He called for allies. He called for holy war. He called Edrin a demon. But the allies were slow. And Edrin was already at the gates. #17, the Siege of Whitewall. Whitewall was the strongest fortress in Lothar. A bright stone castle on a hill. Its walls were so pale they looked like snow. Edrin surrounded it. The siege lasted 4 months. Lothar defenders fought bravely. But Edrin used a new weapon. Trebuchets. Massive machines that hurled stones. Whitewall's walls cracked. The defenders starved. And in the final week, the gates opened. Not because the walls fell, but because the people inside forced the soldiers to surrender. That moment was historic, because it proved something. Walls cannot protect a kingdom if the people lose hope. #18, the First Treaty of Iron. Edrin did not destroy Lothar completely. He did something smarter. He forced a treaty. Lothar would remain a kingdom, but it would pay tribute. It would provide soldiers. It would open trade routes. And most importantly, it would recognize Edrin as the High King of Varen and protector of the West. It was a political masterstroke, because now Edrin was not just a conqueror. He was becoming a legitimate ruler in the eyes of other kingdoms. #19, the religious problem. Religion was the greatest obstacle. Lothar was deeply religious. Their priests called Edrin a pagan, a blasphemer, a tyrant. Edrin understood something. He could conquer land, but he could not conquer belief. So he made a deal with the priests. He promised no forced conversions, protection of churches, respect for sacred laws. In exchange, the priests would preach peace. Some priests agreed. Some refused. Those who refused disappeared. Quietly. And so Edrin did what every empire builder eventually does. He used religion as a tool. #20, the Marriage of Steel. To solidify his rule, Edrin married a Lothar princess, Princess Alira. She was educated, graceful, fluent in multiple languages. And she hated him at first, because she saw him as a butcher. But Alira was also intelligent. She understood power, and she understood survival. Their marriage was not romantic. It was political. But over time, something strange happened. They began respecting each other. Alira became Edrin's advisor. She taught him diplomacy. He taught her reality. Together, they became unstoppable. #21, the birth of the... In 938, Alira gave birth to a son. His name was Ravan Valek. The child was celebrated across the empire, because now Edrin had something every ruler needs. A future. And with a future came ambition. #22, the Northern Threat. While Edrin conquered west and south, the north was waking. The northern tribes had always been scattered. But now, a new leader was uniting them. A warlord named Skarn the Wolf. Skarn was as brutal as Edrin. But unlike Edrin, Skarn ruled through fear alone. He burned villages. He enslaved prisoners. He sacrificed enemies. And he declared, "The Iron Crown belongs to the North." For the first time, Edrin faced an enemy who did not fear him. An enemy who wanted his symbol. #23, the First Meeting of Kings. In 945, messengers arrived. Skarn demanded a meeting. A challenge. A negotiation. Edrin agreed. They met on neutral ground near a frozen river. Edrin wore the Iron Crown. Skarn wore a wolf pelt cloak. They stared at each other for a long time. Then Skarn spoke. "You wear iron like a man, but you rule like a priest." Edrin answered. "And you wear fur like a beast, but you dream like a child." The meeting ended without peace, but historians later wrote, "This was the moment the Empire's greatest war became inevitable." #24, the Great Northern War begins. In 947, Skarn invaded. His army moved like winter. Vast, cold, unstoppable. They attacked northern villages. They burned outposts. They slaughtered soldiers. Edrin responded. He marched north, and the world watched, because two monsters were about to collide. #25, the Battle of Black Ice. The battle took place on a frozen lake. The ice was thick enough for armies. Snow fell like ash. Edrin's disciplined formations met Skarn's wild charges. The battle lasted all day. The ice cracked under the weight of bodies. Men fell into freezing water. Horses screamed. Arrows darkened the sky. And in the final hours, Edrin and Skarn fought face to face. Edrin's sword was heavier. Skarn's axe was faster. They wounded each other. But Edrin won. Not by strength, by patience. He waited for Skarn to overextend. Then he struck. Skarn fell, bleeding onto the ice. And with his final breath, he whispered, "The crown will break you." Edrin stood over him, the snow falling on his iron crown. And he replied, "Then I will break the world first." Skarn died. The northern tribes collapsed, and the Iron Empire expanded. #26, the cost of victory. Edrin won, but the war changed him. He became harsher, colder, more paranoid. He began executing officers for small failures. He began demanding perfection. He began sleeping with a sword beside him. Alira noticed. She warned him, "You cannot rule an empire with fear forever." Edrin answered, "Fear built this empire. Fear will keep it." #27, the Empire of Iron. By 960, Edrin ruled an empire stretching from mountains in the north, to plains in the south, to forests in the west, to rivers in the east. He built roads. He built forts. He created a new law code. He created a tax system. He built the first imperial army that did not belong to nobles. It belonged to the crown, to the Iron Crown. And for the first time in history, the world began calling his empire the Iron Dominion. #28, the Seeds of Collapse. Every empire contains its own death. Edrin's empire was strong, but it had cracks. # the nobles hated losing power. # the priests feared his control. # the conquered people resented tribute. # the army grew too large. # the crown became too heavy. And Edrin himself grew older. His hair turned gray. His scars ached. His temper worsened. And his son, Ravin, grew into a young man with his own ideas. And the greatest threat to an empire is not always an enemy outside. Sometimes, it is the air inside. #29, the final years of Part 1. In 1110, Edrin was an old king, but still feared, still respected, still unstoppable. He wore the Iron Crown every day. It had become part of his identity. He had survived assassins. He had crushed rebellions. He had expanded borders. But now, whispers returned. Whispers of a new rebellion. Whispers of a noble alliance. Whispers that the empire was too large. And then, in 1120, something happened. Something that would change everything. Edrin collapsed in the Imperial Hall. Not from poison. Not from a blade. From his own body. The Iron King was dying. And as he lay in bed, the nobles gathered. The priests prayed. The soldiers waited. And the heir, Ravan Valak, stood silently, watching, because the Empire was about to face the greatest moment in its history. The moment after the Iron King. #white heavy checkmark end of part 1. If you want, I will continue immediately with #pushpin part 2, 10,000 plus words. The Empire splits, 1,121,300. Civil wars. Betrayals. Assassinations. The rise of new kings. The Iron Crown stolen. The beginning of collapse. #1, the deathbed of the Iron King, 1120. The final days of Edrin Valak did not look like the heroic ending that poets would later invent. There was no shining battlefield. No last great charge. No final victory. There was only a bed. A dim chamber in the heart of the imperial capital. A week-old man. And a crown that felt heavier than it ever had before. The Iron Crown sat on a stone table beside him, guarded by 2 silent soldiers who did not blink. The king's breathing was slow and uneven. His hands, once strong enough to crush a man's wrist, now shook as if winter lived inside his bones. The Empire was outside that room. It waited like a wolf pack. And inside, a smaller war had already begun. Not with swords. With whispers. #2, the 3 factions. As Edrin's illness spread through the palace, 3 forces began to form. Faction 1, the Loyalists, led by the Imperial Army commanders and the Old War veterans. They believed the Empire could only survive if it remained unified under the Valak bloodline. They supported Prince Ravan Valak ***, the heir. Faction 2, the Noble Coalition, led by powerful nobles who had been forced to kneel under Edrin's reforms. They hated the centralized Imperial Army. They hated taxes. They hated the idea of the crown controlling their lands. They wanted the Empire to return to the old system, kings with weak power and nobles with strong power. They did not want Ravan. They wanted a puppet. Faction 3, the Temple Alliance, led by the high priests of the Western faith. They tolerated Edrin only because he had promised protection. But they never trusted him, and they feared what his son might become. The Temple wanted the Empire to be ruled under religious authority, not under iron. #3, Queen Alira's warning. Queen Alira ***, now older but still sharp, sat beside Edrin's bed. She was the only one who could speak to him without fear. She leaned close and whispered, "Greater than, they are already dividing your empire, Edrin. Greater than, even before you're gone." Edrin's eyes opened. They were still hard, still dangerous, but tired. He rasped, "Greater than, let them try." Alira shook her head. "Greater than, you cannot fight them now. Greater than, you built the empire on fear. Greater than, but fear dies when the king dies." Edrin's hand clenched weakly. "Greater than, then my son must become fear." Alira's voice softened. "Greater than, or he must become something better." #4, Prince Ravan, the heir of 2 worlds. Ravan Valak ***, was not like his father. He had Edrin's strength, yes, but he also had Alira's mind. He was educated, diplomatic. He spoke multiple languages. He understood trade and religion. And he had something Edrin never had, a desire to be loved. This was his weakness, and also his greatest potential. Ravan wanted unity. He wanted peace. He wanted the empire to last. But he was stepping into a throne built from violence. And violence does not respect kindness. #5, the secret meeting of the nobles. While the palace mourned, the nobles gathered in a private hall. The leader of the coalition was **Duke Marek of Thornhold ***, a man whose family had once ruled half the West before Edrin broke them. Merrick was calm. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He smiled. And when a man smiles while planning betrayal, it is always worse. Merrick said, "Greater than, the Iron King dies. Greater than, his son will be crowned. Greater than, and then we will all be prisoners again." A noble asked, "Greater than, so what do we do?" Merrick's eyes narrowed. "Greater than, we do what the Empire was built on. Greater than, we take the crown. #6, the crown must not leave the palace." Edrin's final command was simple. The Iron Crown must remain in the palace. The Iron Crown was more than a symbol. It was legitimacy. It was fear. It was history. And if someone stole it, they could claim to be the true ruler. So Edrin placed it under the protection of General Varos Kine ***, the most loyal commander in the Empire. Varos was old, scarred, a man who had fought beside Edrin since the early wars. He swore an oath. "Greater than, I will die before the crown is taken." Edrin nodded. "Greater than, then you may die soon." #7, the death of Edrin Valak. Edrin died on the night of **Winter's Eve ***, 1120. Snow fell over the capital like ash. The bells rang. The Empire mourned. But not everyone mourned the same way. Some cried. Some celebrated. Some sharpened knives. In the palace, Alira held Edrin's hand as his breath stopped. His last words were barely audible. He said, "Greater than, do not let them weaken it." Alira whispered, "Greater than, I won't." And with that, the Iron King became history. #8, the funeral of steel. Edrin's funeral was unlike any king before him. His body was not placed in gold. It was placed in iron. A coffin forged from steel plates. His sword lay across his chest. His armor was polished and placed beside him. And the Iron Crown was not buried. Because it could not be buried. It was too important. Instead, it was carried behind the coffin by General Varos. The nobles watched it like hungry wolves. The priests prayed over it like it was cursed. The soldiers stared at it like it was a god. And Raven walked behind it, silent, knowing that soon it would be placed on his head. Or stolen. Or drenched in blood. #9, the coronation of Raven Valak. Raven was crowned in the Grand Hall. Not in a forge like his father. He wanted to show the Empire had changed. He wanted to show civilization. So he held a grand ceremony. Nobles attended. Priests attended. Merchants attended. Foreign ambassadors attended. The Empire looked united. But beneath the silk and ceremony, everyone was counting. Counting soldiers. Counting allies. Counting betrayals. General Varos carried the crown forward. The high priest spoke prayers. Raven knelt. And the crown touched his brow. The Iron Crown sat on his head. And for a moment, the Empire held its breath. Raven stood and said, "Greater than, I am not my father. Greater than, but I will protect what he built." Many applauded. Some smiled. Duke Merrick smiled too. But his smile meant something else. #10, the first test, the Border Rebellion. Only 2 weeks after Raven's coronation, news arrived. A southern province had rebelled. The governor declared independence. He claimed the Empire was weak now. He claimed the Iron King was dead. He claimed the Empire would collapse. The nobles looked at Raven, waiting. Would he be merciful? Would he negotiate? Would he show weakness? Raven's first decision, as emperor, would define him. He chose war. He ordered General Varos to march. He ordered the Imperial Army south. And he said, "Greater than, tell them, the Iron Crown does not die." 11, the Siege of Redmarsh, 1121. The rebellion centered around a fortified town called Redmarsh. It was built on swamp land. Hard to siege. Hard to starve. Hard to storm. The rebels believed the Empire would not waste time. They believed Raven would negotiate. They believed wrong. Raven ordered the siege to continue until surrender. For 6 months, Redmarsh resisted. Then winter came. The swamp froze, and the Imperial army attacked. The battle was brutal. The rebels were crushed. The governor was captured. Raven faced a choice: mercy or fear. He executed the governor publicly, but he spared the town. This was Raven's style. Punish the leader. Spare the people. Keep the Empire stable. Many praised him, but some soldiers whispered, "He is too soft." 12, Duke Merrick's plan begins. While Raven fought rebels, Duke Merrick moved quietly. He began gathering support. He promised nobles reduced taxes, more autonomy, weaker central army, restored noble privileges. Nobles joined him, not because they loved him, because they loved their power. Merrick also made secret contact with Prince Kaelin Valak ***, Raven's half-brother. Kaelin was born from Edrin's early years, before Alira. His mother was a Varen warwoman. Kaelin was older than Raven, and he believed the throne should have been his. He was brutal, charismatic, a true son of Edrin's violence. Merrick offered him something. "We can put you on the throne, and we can control the Empire." Kaelin smiled. "No, you can help me take the throne, and then I will control you." Merrick did not like that, but he needed Kaelin, so he agreed. 13, the temple turns against Raven. The high priests began preaching that the Iron Crown was cursed. They claimed it was forged from blood. It was born from murder. It carried the sins of war. Raven tried diplomacy. He met with the priests. He offered funding for temples. He offered protection. But the priests wanted more. They wanted control. And Raven refused. So the Temple Alliance began supporting the Noble Coalition secretly. The Empire's 3 forces were now aligning. Nobles plus Temple plus Kaelin. Against Raven. 14, the Night of the Poisoned Wine, 1124. In 1124, Raven hosted a feast. He wanted unity. He invited nobles, priests, commanders, merchants. He believed peace could be created through celebration. But celebration is where knives hide. That night, a servant poured wine. Raven drank, and within minutes, his vision blurred. His throat burned. He collapsed. Chaos erupted. The palace guards seized servants. The nobles pretended shock. General Varos drew his sword and stood over Raven's body. Raven survived. Barely. But the message was clear. Someone tried to kill the Iron Emperor, and the Empire's calm surface cracked. 15, the Emperor's paranoia. After the poisoning, Raven changed. He began trusting fewer people. He increased guard patrols. He questioned nobles harshly. He began executing suspected conspirators. Not as brutally as his father, but enough to send fear through the court. Alira warned him. "Fear is a poison too, Raven." Raven replied, "Then I will drink it if I must." 16, General Varos kind dies, 1126. The greatest blow came in 1126. General Varos, protector of the crown, was ambushed on the road. He was traveling with a small escort. Assassins attacked. They killed his men. They stabbed him repeatedly. Varos fought like a dying bear. He killed 3 assassins before he fell. When his body was found, he was still gripping his sword. And on his chest, carved into his armor, were words. "The crown will fall." Ravin mourned Varos like a father. Because Varos had been the Empire's backbone. Now the backbone was broken. #17, the rise of General Selvig. Ravin appointed a new commander. General Selvig Aaron ***, younger, ambitious, brilliant. Selvig was loyal, at least at first. He admired Ravin. But he also believed the Empire needed strength. Not diplomacy. Not compromise. Strength. Selvig began pushing Ravin toward harsher policies. He said, "Your father built an empire of iron. You are trying to rule it like a garden." Ravin replied, "I want it to survive." Selvig said, "Then rule it like a weapon." #18, Prince Kaelin's Rebellion, 1130. In 1130, Kaelin finally struck. He declared himself the true Iron Heir. He claimed Ravin was weak. He claimed the Empire was being corrupted by priests and nobles. He promised a return to Edrin's style. Warriors flocked to him, especially the old Varan clans. The Empire split in two. Ravin in the capital, Kaelin in the northern provinces. And between them, nobles waited, ready to join whichever side won. This was the beginning of the First Iron Civil War. #19, the Battle of Greyfield, 1131. Ravin marched north with the Imperial Army. Kaelin marched south with clan warriors. They met at Greyfield, a wide open field under gray skies. Brother against brother. Same blood. Same empire. Different visions. Ravin offered peace. Kaelin laughed. Kaelin shouted, "You wear the crown, but you do not deserve it." The battle began. It was savage. Kaelin's warriors fought like wolves. Ravin's army fought like disciplined stone. The battle lasted a day. At sunset, neither side had won. Bodies lay everywhere, and the field became a graveyard. Ravin retreated. Kaelin retreated. And the Empire learned a terrible truth. The Iron Crown could not stop civil war. #20, the noble betrayal. Duke Merek waited for the perfect moment. And then he did what traitors always do. He struck when both sides were wounded. In 1132, Merek declared independence. He took western provinces. He formed a Council of Lords. He claimed the Empire no longer existed. He claimed each region must rule itself. This was not just rebellion. This was fragmentation. The Empire began breaking into pieces. #21, the Temple's holy decree. The Temple Alliance issued a decree. They declared Ravin illegitimate. They declared Kaelin a heretic. They declared Merek a sinner. And they claimed the Empire must be ruled by the Temple itself. This was the most dangerous move, because religion could mobilize the masses. And soon, holy militias formed. They marched with banners. They burned towns that resisted. They executed officials. The Empire now had 3 wars at once. Ravin versus Kaelin. Nobles versus Empire. Temple versus everyone. The Iron Dominion was collapsing. #22, Queen Alira's last act. Alira knew diplomacy was dying. So she chose something else. She secretly met with Duke Merek. She offered him a deal. She said, "Support Ravin, and you will keep your lands." Merek refused. He wanted the crown. Alira then met with temple leaders. She offered them influence. They refused. They wanted control. Finally, she met with Kaelin. She begged him. She said, "You will destroy everything your father built." Kaelin answered, "Good. It deserves to die." Alira realized then. The Empire was doomed, unless something drastic happened. #23, the stealing of the Iron Crown, 1135. The most famous event of this era occurred in 1135. The palace was attacked, not by an army, by shadows. Assassins infiltrated. They killed guards. They moved like ghosts. And they reached the vault where the Iron Crown was stored. When morning came, the Empire discovered the impossible. The Iron Crown was gone. No one knew who stole it. Some blamed Marek. Some blamed Kaelin. Some blamed the temple. Some blamed foreign agents. But the truth was worse. The crown had been taken by someone inside the palace. A betrayal at the heart. And when the symbol disappeared, the Empire's legitimacy collapsed. 24, the Empire without a crown. Raven could still rule. He still had the army. He still had the capital. But people began whispering. If he is the true emperor, where is the crown? Rebellion spread. Governors declared independence. Trade routes collapsed. Bandits grew stronger. The Empire's roads became unsafe. The Iron Dominion began to feel like a broken map. 25, Raven's dark transformation. Raven was not weak, but he was exhausted. He had tried peace. He had tried mercy. He had tried strength. And now he had lost the crown. In 1136, Raven did something he had never done before. He ordered the execution of 50 nobles at once. Without trial. Without debate. He accused them of conspiracy. The court was shocked. The temple condemned him. But the soldiers cheered. Because for the first time, Raven looked like Edrin. And the Empire remembered fear. 26, the return of the Iron Crown, 1138. 2 years later, the crown returned. It appeared in the north. On Kaelin's head. Kaelin held a massive rally. He raised the crown high and shouted, "The Iron Crown chose me." The crowd roared. Raven was furious. He believed Kaelin had stolen it. Kaelin claimed the temple had given it to him. The temple denied. Marek denied. No one told the truth. But the result was clear. The civil war would now become total. Because whoever wore the crown could claim to be the rightful ruler. 27, the Second Battle of Black Ice, 1140. The brothers met again, near the same frozen lake where Edrin had killed Skarn. The symbolism was heavy. The snow fell. The ice was thick. Kaelin wore the crown. Raven wore armor. And both believed the Empire belonged to them. The battle was worse than the first. Thousands died. The ice cracked again. Men drowned again. And at the center, Raven and Kaelin fought. Kaelin was stronger. Raven was smarter. The fight lasted long. Then Raven did something desperate. He struck Kaelin's shoulder and knocked him back. Kaelin slipped on blood-slick ice. He fell. Raven raised his sword. And hesitated. Because Kaelin was his brother. And in that hesitation, Kaelin stabbed him in the leg. Raven fell. Kaelin stood over him. And he whispered, "You still want mercy." Then Kaelin walked away, leaving Raven alive. Because Kaelin wanted him to suffer. 28, the Empire's slow death, 1140 1200. After that battle, the Empire never truly recovered. For 60 years, the Iron Dominion was a land of shifting borders, endless rebellions, bandit kingdoms, religious wars, noble feuds, starving cities. The imperial roads became unsafe. Trade shrank. People returned to local loyalties. The great empire of Edrin became a memory. And in that chaos, new powers rose. 29, the merchant cities of the South. In the South, merchants formed independent city-states. They built walls. They hired armies. They controlled trade routes. They became rich. They did not care about the Iron Crown. They cared about profit. These cities would later become the seeds of a new era. The Age of Gold. But for now, they watched the empire bleed. #30, the death of Queen Alira, 1162. Alira died quietly. Not assassinated. Not in battle. In her bed. But her death felt like the last light going out. Because she had been the Empire's last true diplomat. When she died, Ravin mourned like a child. He said, "My father built the Empire with iron. My mother held it together with words. And now both were gone." #31, the fall of Prince Kaelin, 1170. Kaelin ruled the North like a warlord. He wore the crown. He executed rivals. He crushed tribes. He believed himself unstoppable. But he made one fatal mistake. He trusted Duke Merek. Merek invited Kaelin to a meeting. A peace summit. Kaelin arrived. Merek poisoned him. Not enough to kill him instantly. Enough to weaken him. Then Merek's soldiers attacked. Kaelin fought. He killed many. But he was outnumbered. And in the end, Kaelin died on the floor of a noble hall. The Iron Crown rolled away from his head. Merek picked it up and smiled, because now the crown belonged to him. #32, Duke Merek, the false emperor. Merek declared himself emperor in 1171. He wore the Iron Crown. He called himself Merek the Restorer. He claimed he would rebuild the empire. But he was not a warrior. He was not a leader. He was a politician. And worse, he was hated. The North hated him for killing Kaelin. The South hated him for taxes. The Temple hated him for ambition. Ravin hated him because he was a thief. Merek wore the crown, but he did not carry its fear. And so, rebellions rose against him immediately. #33, the last march of Ravin Valek. Ravin, now older and wounded, gathered his remaining loyalists. He marched west, not to reclaim the empire, but to reclaim the crown. Because he believed, if the Iron Crown returned to the rightful line, unity might return. This was his final gamble. He marched like a dying lion. #34, the Battle of Thornhold, 1174. Thornhold was Merek's fortress. It was huge. Stone and iron. Ravin laid siege. The siege lasted 7 months. During the final assault, Ravin led from the front. He climbed ladders. He fought on walls. He bled. He screamed orders. And finally, the gates fell. Ravin entered the fortress. He reached Merek's hall. Merek stood wearing the crown. Trembling, Ravin walked forward and said, "You stole my father's empire." Merek replied, "Your father stole it first." Ravin's eyes darkened. "Then I will steal it back." He killed Merek with one sword strike. The Iron Crown fell. Ravin picked it up. And for the first time in decades, the crown was back in the Valek hands. But the victory was hollow, because the empire was already too broken. #35, Ravin's death, 1175. Ravin returned to the capital. He wore the crown again. He declared reunification. But his body was failing. His old wound from Kaelin never healed properly. In 1175, he collapsed. And this time, he did not rise. The Iron Emperor died, the last true son of Edrin. And with his death, the Valek line weakened beyond repair. #36, the 100-year fragmentation, 1175, 1275. For the next century, the Iron Dominion existed only in name. The empire shattered into northern war kingdoms, western noble states, temple-controlled regions, merchant republics, Bandit territories. The Iron Crown passed from hand to hand. Sometimes stolen. Sometimes traded. Sometimes buried. Sometimes used as ransom. The symbol became less sacred, more like a cursed object. #37, the Temple War, 1240–1260. The temple attempted to seize full control. They formed a holy army. They marched across the West. They burned heretic towns. They executed nobles. They tried to create a religious empire. At first, they succeeded. But then the merchant cities funded mercenaries. The nobles formed alliances. The North sent raiders. The temple army was crushed. The priests were humiliated. And the people lost faith in them. Religion's power weakened. And politics returned. #38, the rise of the new dynasty, House Saravin. In 1280, a new family rose. They were not Valaks. They were not old nobles. They were something new. They were a military house from the east. House Saravin. Their leader was Lord Kale, Saravin ***. He was young, brilliant, and unlike others, he did not claim the Iron Crown immediately. He claimed something else. Order. He rebuilt roads. He defeated bandits. He negotiated trade. He promised stability. People began supporting him. Not because of bloodline. Because of results. #39, Kale Saravin's vision. Kale believed the empire could be rebuilt. But not as Edrin built it. Not through fear alone. He wanted a new empire. Law-based. Trade-supported. Culturally flexible. Militarily disciplined. He said, "Iron is strong, but iron alone rusts. An empire needs law to stay sharp." Kale began conquering territories, but he also offered fair treaties. He did not burn everything. He integrated. Slowly. Cleverly. #40, the end of Part 2, 1300. By the year *1300**, the world stood at a turning point again. The Iron Crown still existed, but it had become a wandering symbol. The old dynasty was dead. The old empire was shattered. And a new power was rising. House Saravin. Kale Saravin had not yet claimed the crown. But he was building something stronger than symbolism. A real empire. And the world knew. Another age was coming. Not the age of the Iron King, but the age of the Iron System. #white heavy check mark end of Part 2. If you want, I will continue with #pushpin Part 3, 10,000 plus words. # the Second Iron Empire, 1300–1600. Kale Saravin's conquest. The final fate of the Iron Crown. The greatest war in the continent. The fall of temples and nobles. The empire's final transformation. The ending that becomes legend. 1. The world after the shattering, 1300. By the year *1300**, people no longer spoke of the Iron Dominion as something real. They spoke of it the way you speak of an old giant. A creature that once walked the earth. A creature that once shook mountains. But now, only bones remained. Those bones were ruined roads, abandoned forts, broken treaties, forgotten laws, bitter families, burned temples, empty crowns. The land was filled with small rulers calling themselves kings. Every hill had a banner. Every river had a toll. Every road had bandits. Every town had walls. And every wall had fear behind it. For 100 years, the empire had not been an empire. It had been a memory. And memories are dangerous. Because memories make people dream. And dreams make people follow. This is how the world became ready for someone new. Someone not born from the old dynasty. Someone not chained to old bloodlines. Someone who could say, greater than, the past failed. Greater than, now I will build the future. That man was Kale, Saravan ***. #2, Kale Saravan, the builder of order. Kale was not a warlord like Kaelin. He was not a symbolic ruler like Merrick. He was not a fearful conqueror like Edrin. Kale was something rarer. He was a strategist who understood. People do not stay loyal to crowns. They stay loyal to stability. Kale's rise began in the east, where old imperial forts still stood. Most were broken. Most were empty. But Kale repaired them. He rebuilt the roads. He drove out bandits. He punished corruption. He protected merchants. And when he conquered towns, he did not burn them. He offered a choice. Surrender peacefully and keep your leaders. Resist and lose everything. Most surrendered. Because after a century of chaos, people wanted peace more than pride. And so, by 1310, Kale controlled a region larger than any kingdom had controlled since Raven. And he did it without the Iron Crown. #3, the crown's location. At this time, the Iron Crown was not in the capital. It was not in a palace. It was not on a king's head. It was hidden. In a monastery. High in the mountains of the west. The monks who guarded it believed the crown was cursed. They believed it was soaked in the blood of Edrin's victims. They believed it brought civil war. So they kept it locked in a stone vault. They wrote warnings on the walls. Greater than, do not awaken the iron. Greater than, do not return the circle of teeth. Greater than, the crown is a hunger. But legends do not stay hidden forever. Because men search for them. And Kale Saravan began searching. Not because he loved the symbol, but because he understood its value. If he wanted to unite the continent, he needed two things. An army. Legitimacy. He already had the army. Now he needed the symbol. #4 the march west, 1312. Kale began marching west. His conquest was careful. He did not rush. He built supply lines. He recruited local soldiers. He trained them in discipline. He created a new doctrine. Not the iron doctrine of fear, but what his historians later called the Saravan doctrine. 1 * order is mercy. 2 law is strength. 3 a stable empire is a weapon. His enemies laughed. They called him soft. They called him a bureaucrat with a sword. But then he defeated them. And their laughter stopped. #5 the first great battle, Stonebridge 1316. Stonebridge was a major crossing over a wide river. It controlled trade. It controlled movement. It controlled war. A coalition of nobles gathered there to stop Kale. They believed if they destroyed him early, the world would remain divided. Their army was large, but it was not united. Each noble commanded his own troops. Each noble argued. Each noble refused to obey others. Kale's army was smaller, but disciplined. He positioned archers. He fortified the bridge. He used engineers to build barriers. When the nobles charged, they met a wall of spears. The battle lasted hours. And by sunset, the river ran red. Kale won. And Stonebridge became the first major symbol of his rise. #6, the southern merchant cities join him. After Stonebridge, the merchant cities made a decision. They had survived chaos by paying mercenaries and building walls. But they knew, if Kale united the land, trade would flourish. So they funded him. They gave him gold. They gave him ships. They gave him intelligence. And Kale gave them something priceless. Protection. This alliance would shape the next 3 centuries. Because for the first time, money and empire worked together. Not as enemies. As partners. #7, the Northern War Kingdoms. The hardest part of unification was the North. The North had become a land of warrior kings. Small kingdoms ruled by men who believed only violence mattered. These kings did not care about law. They cared about strength. Chaol knew diplomacy would fail. So he did something clever. He invited them to a tournament. A great gathering. A chance to prove themselves. Many came. They believed they could kill him. Or embarrass him. Or steal his glory. Chaol welcomed them. He feasted them. He watched them. And while they drank, Chaol's spies mapped their alliances, their rivalries, their weaknesses. Then, after the tournament, Chaol marched north. And one by one, he destroyed them. Not in one huge war. In a series of surgical strikes. #8 The Fall of King Atroth, 1324. The strongest northern king was *Atroth Ironhand ***. A giant of a man. A brutal ruler. He controlled 3 fortresses. His army was feared. He challenged Chaol publicly. Chaol accepted. They met in battle near a frozen valley. Atroth charged. Chaol's men held. Atroth's warriors fought wildly. Chaol's soldiers fought as a machine. Atroth was eventually surrounded. He refused to surrender. Chaol approached him and offered him a choice. Greater than kneel and live. Greater than or stand and die. Atroth laughed. Greater than, only Valak speak like that. Chaol replied. Greater than, then you have not learned the lesson of history. Chaol executed Atroth. But he did something different than Edrin. He did not massacre the army. He offered them citizenship in the new empire. Many accepted, because Chaol's empire offered something they had never had. A future. #9, the capital is reclaimed, 1330. By 1330, Chaol reached the old imperial capital. It was no longer grand. It was a wounded city. Walls broken. Districts abandoned. Temples ruined. Markets empty. But the bones of greatness were still there. Chaol entered the city without celebration. He walked through ruins. He stood in the old grand hall, where Raven had once been crowned. And he whispered, Greater than, this place will live again. He began rebuilding immediately. He repaired walls. He restored roads. He invited merchants. He reopened trade. And slowly, the capital began breathing again. #10, the hunt for the Iron Crown. Now Chaol had everything except the symbol. So he sent emissaries to the western mountains. They returned with rumors. The crown was in a monastery, protected by monks, hidden in a vault. Chaol could have attacked, but he did not, because he understood. If he took it by force, it would look like theft. He needed the crown to be given. So he traveled there himself. #11, the Monastery of Silent Stone, 1333. The monastery was ancient, built into cliffs. Wind howled around it. The monks were pale, quiet men. They did not bow. They did not fear Chaol. They feared the crown. The abbot, an old man named *** brother Joran ***, met Chaol. Chaol said, I came for the Iron Crown. Brother Joran replied, You came for a curse. Chaol answered, I came for a symbol. The abbot shook his head. Symbols destroy men. Chaol said, Then I will be the man who destroys the symbol. The abbot stared at him. And for the first time in decades, someone spoke about the crown not as power, but as a problem. #12, the abbot's test. Brother Joran did not give Chaol the crown. Instead, he gave him a test. He said, If you want it, you must spend 3 days in the vault with it. Alone. No guards. No food except bread and water. If you survive, you may take it. Kale accepted. The monks led him into the vault. The door closed. Darkness. Silence. And in the center of the vault sat the Iron Crown. On a stone pedestal. It looked smaller than Legends, but heavier, like it carried centuries. Kale sat and waited. #13, 3 days in the vault. The vault was cold. The air smelled like stone. Kale stared at the crown for hours. He thought of Edrin, Raven, Kalen, Merrick, all dead, all ruined, all destroyed by this symbol. Kale asked himself, what is a crown? And the answer came slowly. A crown is a lie. It tells people, one man is special. It tells people, one bloodline is chosen. It tells people, one ruler is destiny. But Kale did not believe in destiny. He believed in systems. And by the second night, Kale did something shocking. He picked up the Iron Crown. And he did not put it on his head. He placed it on the ground. He stepped on it, not to destroy it, but to show himself. He was not afraid of it. And then he whispered, you will not rule me. On the third day, the vault door opened. Kale walked out, his face pale, his eyes calm. The abbot asked, what did you learn? Kale replied, the crown is not power. The crown is hunger. The abbot nodded. And finally, he gave Kale the Iron Crown. #14, the second coronation, 1334. Kale returned to the capital. He announced a coronation. The entire continent watched. Kings, nobles, merchants, priests, warriors. They all came. Because everyone wanted to see. Would Kale wear the Iron Crown? Would he become the next Iron King? Or would he do something different? The ceremony began. The high priest approached. The Iron Crown was carried forward. Kale knelt. The crown was placed on his head. And the crowd roared. But then Kale stood and removed it. He held it in his hands and said, this crown is history, but history will not rule us. He placed the crown on a pedestal beside the throne, not on his head. And he declared, the Second Iron Empire would not be ruled by a man. It would be ruled by law. This moment became the foundation of a new era. #15, the creation of the Iron Code. Kale created the *** Iron Code ***, a new legal system. It included standardized taxes, equal trade laws, protection of merchants, limits on noble power, military service rules, local councils, court systems. This was revolutionary because it meant the empire could function even if the emperor died. It was no longer dependent on one monster. It was dependent on structure. And structure is harder to kill than kings. #16, the Noble Revolt of 1342. Not everyone accepted the Iron Code. The nobles saw their power shrinking. They saw their privileges dying. So they rebelled. They gathered armies. They declared Kale a tyrant. They declared the Iron Code an attack on tradition. Kale responded with brutal efficiency. He marched. He defeated them. He executed the rebel leaders. But then, he did not seize their lands. He redistributed them under imperial law. This created a new noble class. Loyal administrators, not hereditary warlords. The old feudal world began dying. #17, the Temple Compromise. Kale understood religion could not be crushed. So he negotiated. He created a compromise. Temples could govern spiritual matters. Priests could preach. Religious courts could exist. But the empire's law was supreme. This was controversial. But it worked. Religion remained strong, but it could no longer dominate politics. Hash 18, the Golden Roads, 1350–1380. Cale's greatest achievement was not war. It was infrastructure. He rebuilt roads across the continent. He restored bridges. He created guarded travel stations. He established postal systems. Merchants could travel safely again. Trade exploded. Cities grew. Art returned. Education expanded. The empire entered a new age. Historians called it Hash the Age of Golden Roads. And for the first time since Edrin, the continent felt stable. Hash 19, the Black Sickness, 1392. Then came disaster. A plague. A sickness. It spread through trade routes. It killed quickly. It emptied cities. It destroyed armies. It broke families. This was the Empire's greatest test. Because plague does not respect law. Cale was old by then. But his system remained. The Iron Code created quarantines, medical stations, supply distributions, tax relief. The Empire survived. Millions died. But the Empire did not collapse. This proved Cale's greatest truth. Systems outlive kings. Hash 20, Cale's death, 1401. Cale died in 1401. Not assassinated. Not in battle. In his sleep. Peacefully. He left behind a stable empire, a strong legal system, a rebuilt capital, a trained bureaucracy, an organized military, and the Iron Crown remained on its pedestal. His son, Emperor Lorien Saravan ***, inherited the throne. And for the first time in centuries, succession did not cause civil war. Hash 21, the Saravan dynasty expands, 1401–1500. The Saravan dynasty ruled wisely for a century. They expanded trade. They created universities. They improved weapons. They built ships. They explored coastlines. They established overseas colonies. The empire became richer than ever. But wealth creates new problems. Because when people grow rich, they grow ambitious. And ambition is the oldest enemy. Hash 22, the rise of the merchant lords. The merchant cities, once allies, began demanding more power. They controlled money. They controlled ships. They controlled trade. They began influencing politics. They funded factions. They bribed officials. They wanted the empire to become a merchant empire, not a law empire. This tension grew slowly, like a crack in stone. Hash 23, the Iron Crown becomes a weapon again, 1520. In 1520, a merchant faction stole the Iron Crown. They believed if they controlled it, they could control legitimacy. They planned to place it on a puppet emperor. But the empire was different now. The crown no longer ruled minds. The law did. The people did not rise for the crown. The army did not obey it blindly. The thieves were captured, and the crown was returned. But the event proved something. Even in a stable empire, symbols remain dangerous. Hash 24, the final war. The War of the Broken Circle, 1540–1565. The merchant lords finally rebelled. They formed alliances with foreign kingdoms. They declared independence. They claimed the empire was outdated. They wanted a new world order. This war was massive. It lasted 25 years. It destroyed fleets. It burned cities. It shattered trade. It caused famine. The empire fought desperately. And in the darkest year of the war, something shocking happened. The emperor was killed. The capital panicked. The enemy marched closer. The empire looked like it might collapse again. And for the first time in 200 years, someone suggested, put the Iron Crown on a warrior. Bring back fear. Hash 25, The Return of the Iron King, 1552. A general rose. His name was General Darius Vane. He was not Saravan blood, but he was the greatest military leader of his generation. The council begged him to lead. Darius refused at first. He said, "The empire is not mine." But the council insisted. They brought him to the throne room. They showed him the Iron Crown. And they said, "Wear it. Save us." Darius stared at it. He knew its history. He knew it destroyed dynasties. He knew it caused civil war. But the empire was dying. So he did the unthinkable. He wore it. And when he wore it, something old returned. Fear. Not because the crown had magic, but because the people remembered what it meant. War. Strength. Control. Hash 26, Darius Vane's brutal victory. Darius did not fight like Kale. He fought like Edrin. He crushed rebellions. He executed traitors. He burned enemy ports. He destroyed merchant fleets. He turned the war into terror. And within 5 years, the merchant rebellion collapsed. The empire was saved. But the cost was enormous. Cities lay in ruins. Trade was shattered. And people feared the crown again. Hash 27, the last choice. After victory, Darius faced a decision. He could: 1, keep the crown and become emperor. 2, return the crown and restore law. 3, destroy the crown forever. The council begged him to keep it. They feared chaos. They feared a weak ruler. They feared another war. But Darius surprised them. He walked into the grand hall. He held the Iron Crown high. And he said, "This crown saved the empire. And this crown will destroy it if it remains." Then, in front of everyone, he took a hammer. And he struck it. Once. Twice. 3 times. The iron cracked. The spikes broke. The circle of teeth shattered. And the Iron Crown, symbol of centuries, was destroyed. The hall fell silent. And Darius whispered, "Now we are free." Hash 28, the end of the Iron Age, 1565. The war ended. The empire survived. But the world had changed. The Iron Crown was gone. The empire was no longer built on fear. It was built on law, trade, and institutions. The nobles had lost their old power. The temples had been reduced to spiritual roles. The merchants were controlled. The military was professional. The continent entered a new era. Historians called it Hash the Age of Republics and Laws. Because after seeing what crowns could do, people began trusting systems more than kings. Hash 29, the final years, 1565–1600. By 1600, the Second Iron Empire still existed. But it looked different. It was no longer an empire of conquest. It was an empire of administration. It maintained roads. It collected taxes. It governed trade. It funded universities. It built ships. It explored new lands. It had become something stable. And stability, ironically, was the true victory. Not the Iron Crown. Not the battles. Not the blood. But the ability for ordinary people to live without constant fear. Hash 30, the legend that remained. Even after the crown was destroyed, people continued telling stories. Children still whispered. Edrin's crown was cursed. Ravan died because of it. Kaelin murdered for it. Merrick stole it. Kale tamed it. Darius shattered it. And historians wrote, the Iron Crown was not just an object. It was a mirror. It showed men what they truly wanted. and what they wanted. The Shadow Century, 1600-1705, when the Empire forgot itself. 1. The world after the crown. When the Iron Crown was destroyed, the world expected chaos. People believed the Empire would collapse without its sacred symbol. Because for centuries, the Iron Crown had been more than metal. It was fear, legitimacy, tradition, the excuse for war, the reason for obedience. And yet, something strange happened. The Empire did not collapse immediately. Instead, it became quiet. Too quiet. Historians call the next 100 years the Shadow Century. Not because the Empire was destroyed, but because the Empire began to forget what it was. #2, the new Empire without a king. After Darius Vane shattered the crown, he did not take the throne. He refused. He believed kings were the disease. He believed crowns were the poison. So he created something that no one had ever seen in the Iron Dominion. A system, a council, a government of laws. He named it the Steel Assembly. It was made of generals, judges, merchant representatives, temple elders, provincial governors. They were sworn to rule together. And in the beginning, it worked. #3, the people who loved peace too much. The Empire entered an era of calm. The roads were safe. Trade grew. Markets expanded. Cities repaired themselves. Libraries reopened. Farmers prospered. Children grew up without hearing the sound of war drums. And that became the problem. Because humans are strange. They do not respect peace. They consume it. They take it for granted. And soon, the next generation did not fear collapse. They believed stability was natural. They believed order would last forever. #4, the rise of the quiet corruption. The Steel Assembly did not become evil overnight. It became lazy. And laziness is the seed of corruption. The governors began to take bribes. The judges began to sell verdicts. The merchants began to control laws. The generals began to fight for budgets instead of honor. The temples began to demand influence. No single person was a tyrant. But together, they became a slow poison. The Empire did not scream. It slowly rotted. #5, the Forgotten Provinces. In the old Iron Empire, conquest forced unity. But now, unity depended on fairness. And fairness began to disappear. Remote provinces suffered first. The far northern towns complained. We pay taxes but receive nothing. The desert provinces complained. We provide salt and iron, but we are treated as servants. The western ports complained. We generate wealth, but the capital steals it. The assembly ignored them. Because the capital was rich. And rich people rarely hear poor people. #6, the Shadow Kings. The most dangerous thing about a fallen monarchy is not the loss of kings. It is the birth of hidden kings. In the Shadow Century, nobles began to rise again. They no longer called themselves kings. They called themselves protectors, dukes, guardians, high patrons. But everyone knew the truth. They ruled like kings. They built private armies. They controlled trade routes. They bribed officials. And they began to fight each other quietly. Not with open war. With assassins. With poison. With whispers. #7, the Grey Wars, 1622-1650. Historians call the conflicts of this era the Grey Wars, because they were not official wars. No banners. No declarations. No glorious battles. Instead, caravan raids, political murders, burned villages, mercenary armies, city riots, It was war without honor, war without truth, war without history. The empire pretended it was still stable. But the people knew. Something was dying. #8, the Great Famine of 1659. Then came the famine. A cold decade. Unexpected frost. Crop failures. Livestock disease. Trade disruptions. And worst of all, corruption. The assembly had the resources to help. But resources were stolen. Food was hoarded. Grain prices exploded. And suddenly, the people did what desperate humans always do. They turned to violence. Riots began in the capital. The assembly sent soldiers. Soldiers fired into crowds. Hundreds died. And for the first time in a century, the empire felt fear again. #9, the birth of the Red Faith. In the famine years, a new religion rose. Not an old temple. Not a noble god. A faith born from hunger. It was called the Red Faith. It taught something simple. The empire is rotten. The steel assembly is a lie. Only blood can cleanse corruption. Its priests wore red cloth. Its followers carved symbols into their skin. And they spread like fire. Because starving people do not want speeches. They want meaning. #10, the woman named Alara. Every age has a voice. The Shadow Century's voice was a woman. Her name was Ilara of Cern. She was born poor. She survived the famine. She watched soldiers kill her brother during a bread riot. And she became a revolutionary. But she was not a barbarian. She was educated. She learned law. She studied history. She memorized the empire's founding principles. And then she did something that terrified the assembly. She began to speak. Not in secret. In public squares. Her words were sharp like knives. You destroyed the crown, but you kept the hunger. You removed the king, but you kept the chains. Ilara became famous. The people called her the Ash Prophet. #11, the assembly's biggest mistake. The assembly could have negotiated. They could have reformed. They could have listened. Instead, they panicked. They ordered Ilara's arrest. But she escaped. Then they ordered her execution. But they could not catch her. Then they did something worse. They executed innocent people in her name. They blamed villages. They burned towns. And this created the very thing they feared. A real rebellion. Not a movement. Not a protest. A war. #12, the Ash Rebellion begins, 1681. In 1681, the first battle happened. It was not an army. It was peasants. Farmers. Starving workers. Miners. They attacked Attack's fortress. The fortress fell. The rebellion gained weapons. Then they attacked another. Then another. The assembly responded with imperial troops. But imperial troops were tired. Underpaid. Disloyal. And many soldiers secretly agreed with the rebels. #13, the Fire of Westbridge. The rebellion's turning point was the city of Westbridge. A rich trading city. It supported the assembly. It hoarded food. It refused to share grain. Ilara marched there. The city closed its gates. Ilara offered peace. They laughed. So she did something that shocked the empire. She burned the city. Not just the gates. Not just the palace. The warehouses. The mansions. The entire wealth district. Westbridge burned for 7 days. Thousands died. And the empire watched in horror. Because they realized Ilara was not a reformer. She was a storm. #14, the empire splits again. By 1690, the empire was divided. #Fire the assembly lands. The capital. Wealthy cities. loyal generals, merchants, the ash lands, starving provinces, miners, farmers, red faith followers, rebel armies, cross the shadow dukes, nobles who stayed neutral, private armies, opportunistic warlords. The empire had become 3 worlds, and all 3 hated each other. 15, the death of Alara, 1702. Alara's death became legend. In 1702, she was betrayed by a noble who pretended to support her. She was captured. The assembly offered her mercy. They offered her a place in government. They offered her wealth. She refused. She said, "If I join you, then I become the same disease I fought." She was executed publicly. Her head was displayed in the Capitol. The assembly celebrated. They believed the rebellion would die. But history is cruel, because martyrdom is stronger than leadership. Alara's death made her immortal. 16, the Ash Kings. After Alara died, the rebellion fractured. But it did not vanish. Instead, it became worse. Because now, without Alara's intelligence, the movement became more violent. New leaders rose. They called themselves Ash Kings. They wore masks of burned iron. They ruled through terror. And suddenly, the rebellion became something different. Not liberation. A new tyranny. 17, the final years of the Shadow Century. By 1705, the empire was exhausted. Cities were poor. Roads were dangerous. Trade collapsed. The assembly was weak. The rebels were brutal. The nobles were greedy. And the people were broken. Historians mark 1705 as the end of the Shadow Century, because a new figure appeared. A man who would change everything. Not with a crown. Not with religion. Not with speeches. But with something the empire had forgotten. Discipline. His name was the modern age, 1900-1950. Technology, war, and the empire reborn. 1, dawn of the 20th century. By 1900, the Iron Empire had transformed. Factories produced steel, weapons, and machinery on an unprecedented scale. Railroads and steamships linked provinces. Armies were mechanized. Urban centers dominated political and economic life. Yet despite this power, the empire faced new challenges. Rapid industrialization had created stark inequality. Workers' rights remained limited. Provinces demanded more autonomy. New ideologies began to spread, questioning authority. The world itself was changing. Scientific advancements and new philosophies promised both progress and upheaval. 2, the first modern revolts, 1905-1915. Discontent among workers and farmers erupted again. Labor unions demanded fair wages and reduced hours. Industrial elites resisted reform. Cities in the north and east saw large strikes, sometimes turning violent. The government responded with military force, police crackdowns, martial law in key urban centers. Despite suppression, the movement could not be extinguished. The empire realized that old methods of iron and fear were no longer enough. 3, the technological revolution. The empire embraced modern technology. Automobiles replaced horses. Electricity powered factories and cities. Telephones and radios improved communication. Mechanized artillery changed military strategy. The army adopted these technologies to maintain control, but the spread of knowledge empowered citizens and rebels alike. Secret societies communicated through encrypted messages. Revolutionary groups began using vehicles for mobility. Industrial sabotage became more sophisticated. This era marked the *** first clash between modern technology and traditional authority ***. 4, World conflicts and the empire's role. During the early 20th century, global conflicts reached the empire's borders. Neighboring kingdoms expanded their armies. Trade rivalries intensified. The empire was drawn into border skirmishes and regional wars. These conflicts tested the empire's military, infrastructure, and diplomacy. Armored trains became mobile fortresses. Telegraph networks coordinated troop movements. Industrial centers doubled as supply hubs. Despite the challenges, the empire maintained dominance. Its combination of centralized authority and industrial might unmatched in the region. #5. Social movements and ideologies. The first half of the century brought social change. Socialist and labor movements gained traction. Feminist groups demanded education and voting rights. Intellectuals criticized corruption and inequality. Former Ash and Red labor factions inspired resistance. The empire's ruling council attempted reforms. Minimum wage laws. Limited labor rights. Public education expansion. Urban infrastructure projects. These reforms mitigated unrest temporarily, but also emboldened activists who sought more radical change. #6. The Second Industrial Revolution and military expansion. By the 1920s and 1930s, the empire leveraged new technology. Assembly line production for military equipment. Aviation for reconnaissance and troop transport. Radio communications for coordination. Armored vehicles for land battles. The military became a *** centralized force ***, capable of suppressing uprisings and defending borders simultaneously. Soldiers were trained in modern tactics. Factories produced tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Coastal defenses were mechanized. The empire's strength was unprecedented, yet its legitimacy was questioned by its own people. #7. Political instability, 1930–1940. Despite military and industrial power, political divisions grew. Provincial governors demanded more autonomy. Merchant guilds pushed for influence over national policy. Worker unions demanded representation and protections. Intellectuals and universities criticized authoritarianism. This created a fragile equilibrium. The empire was strong militarily, but divided politically. Leaders realized reform and control had to coexist. Failure to balance these elements could lead to civil war. #8. The global war threat, 1940–1945. The world was engulfed in large-scale wars. The empire faced threats from neighboring powers, mercenary forces employed by hostile factions, internal resistance, groups inspired by global ideologies. To survive, the empire mobilized industrial production for war, strengthened internal security, centralized decision-making in the council. The combination of military modernization, industrial might, and intelligence networks allowed the empire to survive without collapsing *9. Economic transformation. The war era reshaped the economy. Factory production skyrocketed. Labor was conscripted into military or war-related industries. Urban migration accelerated. Infrastructure projects expanded: roads, railways, ports. Despite progress, inequality persisted. Wealth concentrated among industrialists. Workers endured long hours and harsh conditions. Rural provinces remained underdeveloped. #10. The rise of a new leadership, 1946–1950. After the war, a new generation of leaders emerged. Military officers with industrial expertise. Intellectuals advocating reform. Provincial governors balancing autonomy with central authority. Among them, General Alaric Davan *, a visionary leader who combined Kashenwerk's discipline with Kale Saravin's legal system and Mara Valen's focus on social justice. Alaric aimed to modernize governance, reduce corruption, expand education, promote industry while protecting workers. His vision laid the foundation for a stable, modern Iron Empire #11, the Empire reborn. By 1950, central authority was re-established. Provinces operated semi-autonomously, but under law. Industrial economy powered urban and rural life. Military modernization maintained peace. Social reforms addressed worker grievances. The empire had endured ash rebellions, merchant wars, industrial uprisings, global conflicts. It had transformed from a *** kingdom ruled by iron and fear to a *** modern state powered by industry, law, and disciplined governance ***. The Iron Crown, long destroyed, was no longer needed. Power had shifted from fear to law, from blood to industry, from crowns to institutions. #12, Legacy of 1900-1950. Historians look at this era as the final crucible of the Iron Empire. It survived *** industrialization, rebellion, and war. It adapted to technology and modern politics. It preserved central authority without reverting to monarchy. It created the foundations of the modern nation. The empire's evolution proved a vital lesson. An empire is not built on crowns or swords. It survives through adaptability, institutions, and the will of its people. #13, Closing of the Iron Crown Chronicles. By 1950, the empire had finally emerged from centuries of Iron Kings, ash rebellions, merchant intrigues, industrial uprisings. The *Iron Crown Chronicles end here, not with a crown, but with the ** birth of a modern empire. Strong enough to endure external threats, structured to survive internal dissent, capable of evolving with technology and society. The Iron Empire was no longer ruled by kings, generals, or crowns. It was governed by * law, industry, and enduring human resilience ***. The Industrial Rebellion and the final transformation, 1850-1900. #1, The Dawn of Industry. By 1850, the Iron Empire had entered an unprecedented era, the Industrial Revolution ***. Steam engines powered factories. Railroads connected provinces for the first time. Ironworks produced unprecedented amounts of steel. Trade boomed with mechanized production. The empire's cities were transformed. Smoke from chimneys filled the skies, rail lines cut through forests and mountains, and workers streamed into urban centers. But not everyone celebrated. The *** people who had once fought for food and freedom now faced a new challenge. Long hours, low wages, child labor, pollution and disease. The empire's transformation came with a human cost. #2, The Industrial Elites. A new class of power emerged. The ** industrial elites ***. Factory owners, mine lords, rail barons, bankers and financiers. They controlled the engines of production and had influence rivaling the emperor himself. This created tension. Traditional nobles resented the influence of industrial wealth. Merchants feared being overshadowed. Workers were exploited. Provinces struggled to maintain loyalty. The industrial elites argued, "We built this empire with our hands. We deserve to shape it." The emperor, still the central authority, faced his first ** internal existential crisis. Could the empire survive industrial change without collapsing? #3, The Worker Uprisings, 1855-1865. By the mid-1850s, discontent among workers exploded. Factories were overcrowded. Conditions were deadly. Wages were minimal. No labor laws existed. Rebellions began in the northern cities, where mining and steel production were concentrated. Workers organized secretly. Strikes, factory sabotage, armed resistance against overseers. These uprisings became known as the Northern Fires ***. The Imperial Army was deployed, but the uprisings were decentralized and fast-moving. Soldiers often sympathized with workers. Rebellions spread faster than forces could respond. Urban warfare became common. The Empire had not faced an enemy like this, the industrialized masses themselves. #4, the Red Labor Movement. Amidst the Northern Fires, a radical movement emerged, the Red Labor Movement ***. Led by a charismatic figure, Mara Valen ***, a former factory worker turned revolutionary. She spoke of justice and equality, advocated worker ownership of factories, promised to dismantle the power of industrial elites. Mara's speeches inspired workers across provinces. The iron that built this empire now chains us. The smoke that rises from your factories is not progress. It is the empire's hunger for our lives. The movement grew rapidly, spreading to mining towns, textile centers, and urban districts. #5, the Industrial Council. The emperor responded by forming the *** Industrial Council ***. Representatives of factories, railroads, and trade. Provincial governors. Imperial military advisors. The council attempted reforms. Shorter work days. Safety regulations. Minimum wages. Child labor restrictions. But these measures were half-hearted and inconsistently enforced. The Red Labor Movement saw the council as a *** tool of the empire, not a solution. #6, the First Industrial War, 1866–1872. Conflict escalated into the First Industrial War ***. Factories were seized by rebels. Railroads sabotaged. Armies clashed with worker militias. Cities burned. Major battles occurred in Steelport ***, Northern Ironworks Hub. Coleridge ***, Mining Region. Eastford ***, Textile Center. The empire deployed elite troops, but the Red Labor Movement used *** guerrilla tactics, sabotage, ambushes, and rail destruction. By 1872, the empire regained control, but the damage was severe. Urban centers destroyed. Industrial output dropped by 40%. Thousands of workers and soldiers dead. #7, technology becomes a weapon. The Industrial War highlighted a key lesson. Technology could be weaponized ***. Factories became production hubs for weapons. Steam engines powered armored trains. Explosives produced in industrial plants. Communication systems, telegraph, used for strategy. Mara Valen's forces adapted. They built underground workshops, created improvised weapons, developed early forms of industrial sabotage. The empire realized that the Industrial Revolution had *** created enemies capable of fighting on a scale never seen before ***. #8, the rise of provincial autonomy. After the First Industrial War, several provinces demanded autonomy. Northern industrial cities refused to pay certain taxes. Southern ports demanded control over trade tariffs. Central provinces demanded military authority over railroads. The empire faced a choice. 1, crush dissent with force. 2, grant concessions and risk fragmentation. Emperor Lyric III attempted a mix. Limited concessions with tight military oversight. This temporarily stabilized the empire. But resentment simmered in industrial centers. New secret societies formed, preparing for the next rebellion. #9, the shadow industrialists. Some industrial elites secretly sided with the workers. They wanted power over the empire if it fell. They funded rebellions discreetly. They manipulated markets, to weaken imperial finances. These shadow industrialists ensured the empire never fully recovered from the northern fires. By 1880, the empire had wealth and technology, but no longer absolute authority. #10. The Second Industrial War, 1880–1890. The Second Industrial War erupted due to worker revolts in mining towns, coastal rebellions funded by industrial guilds, a failed assassination attempt on Emperor Lyric III. This war was more destructive than the first. Railroads destroyed across multiple provinces. Factories burned or repurposed for arms. Urban populations displaced by fighting. Armored trains used in large-scale battles for the first time. Mara Valen was killed in 1885 during the Siege of Steelport, but her movement survived. #11. The Age of Industrial Tyranny. After the Second Industrial War, the empire entered a new phase. Industrial tyranny ***. The emperor and council centralized authority. Industrial centers were placed under martial law. Labor unions were banned or controlled. Surveillance increased in urban districts. The empire had regained stability, but at the cost of freedom and prosperity. Workers endured long hours. Cities were heavily militarized. Merchants controlled much of the economy. Historians later called this period the Age of Iron and Smoke. #12. Cultural and social changes. Despite oppression, culture evolved. Literature criticized industrial tyranny. Art reflected urban misery. Science and engineering advanced rapidly. Education focused on industrial skills. The empire had transformed from a land of iron crowns to a nation of factories, railroads, and machines. Wealth concentrated in elite hands. Population divided between obedience and rebellion. #13. The emergence of the modern empire. By 1890, the empire had survived. Territorial integrity maintained. Industrial power unmatched in the region. Military discipline maintained order. Trade and production flourished. But it was fragile. Worker dissatisfaction remained. Industrial elites held covert power. Provincial tensions persisted. The empire had transformed again, from Iron Empire to Industrial Empire ***. #14. The end of the 19th century, 1890–1900. The closing decade of the century saw railroads linking distant provinces, armored trains patrolling borders, urban uprisings suppressed, industrial production at all-time highs. Yet beneath the surface, social unrest simmered. Secret societies plotted revolution. Economic inequality threatened stability. The empire stood tall, but the human cost had reshaped its soul ***. The final lesson of the 19th century. Iron can build an empire, but fire and smoke shape its destiny. #white heavy checkmark part 7 complete. This concludes the epic timeline from 1850–1900 ***, showing industrial transformation, worker uprisings, merchant power struggles, wars and rebellions, emergence of the modern Iron Empire. If you want, I can now create the Iron Restoration, 1705–1780, Rise of Cashen Rurk. 1. A man of discipline. The Shadow Century left the empire fractured and exhausted. Chaos was everywhere. Trade routes were ruined. Cities were impoverished. Famine lingered. Rebel factions roamed. In this void, one man emerged, General Cashen Rurk ***. He was not a noble. He was not a prophet. He was a soldier. But unlike previous generals, Cashen had a vision. The empire does not need kings, it needs order. He trained a loyal army, using strict discipline, and began to reclaim the provinces. Unlike Darius or Kale, He would not rely on diplomacy alone. Where law had failed, he brought iron. #2, the first campaign, 1706-1712. Cashen's first campaign targeted the Ash Kings, ***, the rebel warlords who ruled southern provinces. He divided the land into strategic zones. He built forts along supply lines. He used spies to infiltrate rebel networks. The rebels underestimated him. They thought another century of weak government would allow them to survive. They were wrong. By 1712, Cashen had captured the last major Ash stronghold, Crimson Hold ***. The remaining rebel leaders either surrendered or were executed. The empire was fractured but alive. #3, the reconstruction begins. Cashen did not waste time celebrating. He understood that winning a war is only half the battle. The other half is governance. He established new laws to replace the corrupted steel assembly, strict taxation policies to fund reconstruction, compulsory military training to maintain order, public works programs to rebuild roads, bridges, and cities. The people hated the strict rules at first. They called him a tyrant. But as cities grew, famine ended, and trade resumed, the grudging respect began to spread. #4, the return of the military aristocracy. Cashen faced a major challenge: the nobles. During the Shadow Century, many nobles had grown rich and independent. Some allied with merchants, some with rebels. Cashen offered them a choice. 1. Submit to imperial authority and retain partial power. 2. Resist and lose everything. Those who resisted faced Cashen's disciplined army. Those who submitted were absorbed into a new military aristocracy loyal to him. For the first time in over a century, the empire had central authority backed by both law and force. #5, trade and wealth restored. Cashen realized that controlling land was not enough. An empire survives on wealth. He reopened trade routes blocked during the Ash Rebellion. He reestablished overseas ports to increase commerce. He standardized currency across provinces. For the first time in decades, merchants could trust the empire. For the first time in decades, cities thrived. #6, the education reform. Cashen understood another truth. An empire cannot last on iron alone. So he created * imperial academies *, military academies for officers, universities for law, science, and governance, schools for children in provinces. This fostered loyalty and knowledge. The people began to see a future beyond war. #7, the threat from the north, 1725. Even as Cashen rebuilt the South and Central Empire, threats remained. The northern clans, long independent, refused to acknowledge imperial authority. They relied on raids, mountain fortresses, and mercenary alliances. Cashen marched north with a precision campaign. Siege engines destroyed fortresses. Supply lines cut rebel reinforcements. Diplomacy persuaded some northern clans to join willingly. By 1730, the north was pacified. The iron restoration was complete. #8, the shadow within. Cashen's rule was harsh. Dissenters were executed or exiled. Taxes were strict. Surveillance ensured compliance. Some began whispering, Cashen is worse than the Ash Kings. He is the empire reborn as a tyrant. Cashen ignored the whispers. He believed stability was more important than opinion. #9, the Second Rebellion, 1740-1755. Despite his success, rebellion simmered. A faction of disloyal nobles conspired with foreign kingdoms. The Red Faith remnants joined them. Small provinces resisted taxation. Cashen responded with ruthless efficiency. He personally led campaigns, crushing opposition. But the rebellion left scars. Towns burned. Villages abandoned. Thousands dead. Still, he solidified central power. #10, the Iron Code restored. Cashin codified his laws into the *** Second Iron Code ***, an updated version of Kale Saravin's original laws. It included military service rules, trade regulations, provincial governance, judicial reforms, taxation and infrastructure rules. The empire had not just survived, it had evolved. Systems now ruled, not kings. #11, cultural revival. Cashin believed an empire also needed culture. Art flourished, funded by the state. Literature celebrated the Iron Restoration. Architecture rebuilt old cities in grandeur. He wanted the empire to feel powerful, civilized, and eternal. #12, diplomacy and foreign relations. Cashin avoided unnecessary wars. Treaties with neighboring kingdoms prevented conflict. Trade alliances strengthened economic power. Military deterrence ensured security. The empire became feared abroad, not for conquest, but for its disciplined efficiency. #13, the death of Cashin Rurk, 1772. Cashin lived long for a man of war. He died peacefully at age 75. Before his death, he gathered the council and said, "I have rebuilt what was lost. I have created an empire that survives even if I die. Let it endure forever." He left behind a central authority stronger than any king, a codified system of law, rebuilt cities and roads, trained armies, loyal provinces. #14, the legacy of the Iron Restoration. After Cashin, the empire entered a century of relative peace. Foreign powers respected its boundaries. Trade boomed. Culture thrived. Central authority was strong. But historians warned, an empire built on discipline can last a century. But eventually, human ambition will test it again. And that test was already beginning to appear. #15, the next era looms. By 1780, whispers circulated. Wealthy merchants wanted more influence. Nobles desired independence. Intellectuals questioned centralized rule. Frontier provinces looked to new leaders. The * Iron Restoration had stabilized the empire. But stability is never permanent. The Iron Restoration, 1705–1780. Rise of Cashin Rurk. #1, a man of discipline. The Shadow Century left the empire fractured and exhausted. Chaos was everywhere. Trade routes were ruined. Cities were impoverished. Famine lingered. Rebel factions roamed. In this void, one man emerged, General Cashin Rurk ***. He was not a noble. He was not a prophet. He was a soldier. But unlike previous generals, Cashin had a vision. The empire does not need kings, it needs order. He trained a loyal army, using strict discipline, and began to reclaim the provinces. Unlike Darius or Kale, he would not rely on diplomacy alone. Where law had failed, he brought iron. #2, the first campaign, 1706–1712. Cashin's first campaign targeted the Ash Kings, ***, the rebel warlords who ruled southern provinces. He divided the land into strategic zones. He built forts along supply lines. He used spies to infiltrate rebel networks. The rebels underestimated him. They thought another century of weak government would allow them to survive. They were wrong. By 1712, Cashin had captured the last major Ash stronghold, Crimson Hold ***. The remaining rebel leaders either surrendered or were executed. The empire was fractured but alive. #3, the reconstruction begins. Cashin did not waste time celebrating. He understood that winning a war is only half the battle. The other half is governance. He established new laws to replace the corrupted steel assembly. strict taxation policies to fund reconstruction, compulsory military training to maintain order, public works programs to rebuild roads, bridges, and cities. The people hated the strict rules at first. They called him a tyrant. But as cities grew, famine ended, and trade resumed, the grudging respect began to spread. #4. The return of the military aristocracy. Cashin faced a major challenge: the nobles. During the Shadow Century, many nobles had grown rich and independent. Some allied with merchants, some with rebels. Cashin offered them a choice. 1. Submit to imperial authority and retain partial power. 2. Resist and lose everything. Those who resisted faced Cashin's disciplined army. Those who submitted were absorbed into a new military aristocracy loyal to him. For the first time in over a century, the empire had central authority backed by both law and force. #5. Trade and wealth restored. Cashin realized that controlling land was not enough. An empire survives on wealth. He reopened trade routes blocked during the Ash Rebellion. He reestablished overseas ports to increase commerce. He standardized currency across provinces. For the first time in decades, merchants could trust the empire. For the first time in decades, cities thrived. #6. The education reform. Cashin understood another truth. An empire cannot last on iron alone. So he created *Imperial Academies*, military academies for officers, universities for law, science, and governance, schools for children in provinces. This fostered loyalty and knowledge. The people began to see a future beyond war. #7. The threat from the north, 1725. Even as Cashin rebuilt the South and Central Empire, threats remained. The northern clans, long independent, refused to acknowledge imperial authority. They relied on raids, mountain fortresses, and mercenary alliances. Cashin marched north with a precision campaign. Siege engines destroyed fortresses. Supply lines cut rebel reinforcements. Diplomacy persuaded some northern clans to join willingly. By 1730, the north was pacified. The Iron Restoration was complete. #8. The Shadow Within. Cashin's rule was harsh. Dissenters were executed or exiled. Taxes were strict. Surveillance ensured compliance. Some began whispering, "Cashin is worse than the Ash Kings. He is the empire reborn as a tyrant." Cashin ignored the whispers. He believed stability was more important than opinion. #9. The Second Rebellion, 1740–1755. Despite his success, rebellion simmered. A faction of disloyal nobles conspired with foreign kingdoms. The Red Faith remnants joined them. Small provinces resisted taxation. Cashin responded with ruthless efficiency. He personally led campaigns, crushing opposition. But the rebellion left scars. Towns burned. Villages abandoned. Thousands dead. Still, he solidified central power. #10. The Iron Code restored. Cashin codified his laws into the **Second Iron Code, **, an updated version of Kael Saravin's original laws. It included military service rules, trade regulations, provincial governance, judicial reforms, taxation and infrastructure rules. The empire had not just survived, it had evolved. Systems now ruled, not kings. #11. Cultural revival. Cashin believed an empire also needed culture. Art flourished, funded by the state. Literature celebrated the Iron Restoration. Architecture rebuilt old cities in grandeur. He wanted the empire to feel powerful, civilized, and eternal. #12. Diplomacy and foreign relations. Cashin avoided unnecessary wars. Treaties with neighboring kingdoms prevented conflict. Trade alliances strengthened economic power. Military deterrence ensured security. The empire became feared abroad, not for conquest, but for its disciplined efficiency. Hash 13, the death of Cashen Rurk, 1772. Cashen lived long for a man of war. He died peacefully at age 75. Before his death, he gathered the council and said, "I have rebuilt what was lost. I have created an empire that survives even if I die. Let it endure forever." He left behind a central authority stronger than any king, a codified system of law, rebuilt cities and roads, trained armies, loyal provinces. Hash 14, the legacy of the Iron Restoration. After Cashen, the empire entered a century of relative peace. Foreign powers respected its boundaries. Trade boomed. Culture thrived. Central authority was strong. But historians warned, an empire built on discipline can last a century. But eventually, human ambition will test it again. And that test was already beginning to appear. Hash 15, the next era looms. By 1780, whispers circulated. Wealthy merchants wanted more influence. Nobles desired independence. Intellectuals questioned centralized rule. Frontier provinces looked to new leaders. The * Iron Restoration had stabilized the empire. But stability is never permanent.